Thank you very much, Tahira. That was a beautiful talk. Um, Full disclosure, everyone, Tahira and I have met before. And I think you were talking about this project in the context of your master's project. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And this is something that you've, I'm assuming, carried on in your spare capacity because you're now in full-time employment elsewhere. So it's really interesting to see how it's come since you've kind of had these concepts. So yeah, well done, and thank you for sharing your work with us. I'll first hand over to the audience. So we have one question in the Q&A. Please do, if anyone else has any questions, add them there as well. So this individual is anonymous, and they said, I want to ask Tahira the same question I did with Amy and Kirsten about lived experience. I can see why having lived experience is really powerful within your talk, as well as the talk prior. In university, I was told, you are not the user, but there are some really helpful insights when we are part of the user group, especially when it's an excluded group. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts about this, or any reflections on lived experience within design and research?
Um, First of all, thank you for your question. I think it's a really interesting question, and actually one of the first things that I thought about, and part of my apprehension when I went into framing the problem and framing this project, because this started out as a master's project. It was actually my final master's project, and I think that's a misconception I had as well, in thinking that academia, often maybe tells you, and outside in industry as well, that you as the designer are not you're not the user. So, and I have heard that as well, but I think throughout this process, I found that to not be the case, and I think that sometimes you can craft really powerful narratives, and you can get out lots of really powerful insights by putting yourself as the user, and especially in the context of inclusivity and inclusive design. There's often, sorry, just being rang by. Sorry. I think often in the context of inclusive design, we are left out of the conversation anyway. So any opportunities there are for us to be part of the conversation, for us to be the ones, driving change, we should be able to take. And when I was first presenting this as a concept for my project to my tutors, I really, I presented it as such, that this is something that I'm bringing forward. That's my own lived experience. This is a problem that I've had, and I would really like to be able to use this opportunity to see if, I could be successful to just improve my life and improve my experience. And very thankfully, I had a very supportive tutor throughout this project who told me that was fine. And we're often told in that kind of academic setting that you've had to define your success criteria. And like I said in the talk, my success criteria was, if the only person I've helped throughout this process is myself, that's good enough for me. But what I did find throughout this process is lived experiences are often not in isolation. Once you are comfortable doing so, in sharing your story or going and finding out, you'll find that actually there are lots of people, maybe not to the same degree or not identical to the way in which you've experienced it, but there are so many others who have experienced the same things as you. And I found that to be incredibly liberating and validating. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Tahira. And it reminds me of something we talked about before in the previous talk about, um, bringing your lived experience, but also making sure that you're not biasing, that you're recognizing the complexity. And I think as well, you talked about some instances where you did make those generalizations about the South Asian community. Where did you kind of find the sweet spot between designing something for yourself, but also designing for the complex experiences within this huge community?
I think initially when I went in, I did have a lot of assumptions, but I think this is something that I found just generally in my job as a UI UX designer as well, is that we often do start off with these assumptions, and then it's a case of, validating some of those assumptions, identifying which assumptions are perhaps the riskiest. And I was really privileged to have had such a fantastic group of people to go and speak to, so experts in that field. And I think even if it annoyed them at times, I just kept going back to those people that I'd identified as my experts, who are working specifically in this niche space of South Asian eating disorders, and even specific eating disorders, because it's such a spectrum. But I spoke to researchers in America. I spoke to some researchers at KCL, and who are very new to this field, but have very quickly become experts because it's such a new field. So I always made sure that my assumptions were validated by them. So they might have started out as things that I thought, but yeah.
Oh, thank you. And this next question is quite interesting. So I think we talked about this last time, about the use of the digital intervention for what you talked about, food anxieties. So we've got a question here from someone anonymous. Awesome talk. Being part of the South Asian community, I experienced the impact of diaspora and generational trauma, I'm assuming that says. The Western culture's preference for lighter skin leads to harmful skin bleaching practices. Using utensils feels strange, as I'm used to eating with my hands. I'm excited about your app and we'll talk about it with my family. Any suggestions on accessing your app offline? Digital poverty is a challenge in my community, and expanding access, would be fantastic if possible. Tahira, any thoughts on that?
So unfortunately the app doesn't exist. So it stayed as a concept, because it was something I designed for my master's project, like I said. But I have since been sort of like just excited at any opportunity that I would have to talk about this work, and to take it forward. Sadly, I haven't had such those opportunities, but I do have a very sort of clear idea of immediate next steps that I would like to take to spread the word. And in terms of the digital, the aspect of it, and the app aspect of it, I think that's why that cuisine map became such a big part of my project. And I think the app is a way in which that cuisine map has taken place. But like I said, it was sort of the center of my project. And so I think taking that, going and designing workshops and hosting those sessions, bringing in those sort of intimate sessions to speak to members within different communities, both within the South Asian community, but I think taking it to other diaspora communities would be a really interesting research step for me, to try and understand and have more of those conversations. And yeah, I think the sort of utensils thing, and I think just this whole journey while I was doing it was so fascinating for me to go through, and take my family on that journey with me as well, because a lot of these issues, the first time I talked to my parents about it was because of this project. They were wildly not aware that these were things I was going through, and the kind of social anxiety I felt, when I didn't recognize food, or I didn't know how I was supposed to eat it. Like, I still don't know how to use chopsticks, and that makes me very embarrassed if ever in a situation when I'm with friends, and I just don't know what to do. And yeah, I also eat with my hands at home. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of education and a lot of compassion that's required within the food and like eating rituals and like behaviors that we have, that maybe a lot of people don't know about, or they just don't necessarily think about. And so I think there are a lot more conversations to be had, and those can all happen outside of a digital space or in a digital space, depending on who it is that we're trying to talk to.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting when we're talking about something that's a very tactile experience, touch,
Yeah.
taste, smell, that is not necessarily something you can capture digitally, maybe. But have you thought about ways to make this an intervention that's non-digital, so it does reach those people who don't have access to digital or internet or um, yeah, that sort of thing?
I think at one point I had thought about it never manifested itself into anything, but it was just only a concept in my head of kind of having it as like in something that you could have interactive in paper format to be able to like go through the journey and almost uncover the cuisine map and be able to ask yourself those questions, because I think it's a very personal introspective journey that I've been on, and I think if I was able to facilitate others to do the same, I think maybe it would allow them to it would help them in the way that it did me, but nothing that I've explored in like a solid way at all.
Well, it's interesting, and I guess what do you feel like is next for you and your career in like bringing inclusive design to those wider spaces that maybe aren't thinking about that what you described as niche groups?
I think it's maybe this has been said already, but it's just a case of taking up space. I think that often the reason why we feel the way we do is because we're not given enough space, or there aren't ways in which we can take up space, and that's something that I've tried to do constantly in my sort of very short career, but my career so far, and always speaking up. I think very recently there have been lots of things going on in the world, and I think it's really important that voice isn't diminished, or people don't speak for you, and I think that's one of the most important things. And in any way that we can, big or small, just be able to give others a platform if you think that your voice, if you think you can amplify their voice or speak up for yourself, is something that I found. And like in my sort of day-to-day job, like I said, context is really important, and always advocating for those other voices. And sometimes, it's not relevant because of the business case or whatever it is. But I think I just know that I'm doing right by myself by just making sure that I still ask the question anyway, what about these people? Yeah.
That's really wonderful. And I guess my final question, if anyone else has a question, please do pop it in the Q&A. Otherwise, we can finish a bit early. But is there anything that you would ask of the Magnify community or even the wider healthcare community to make sure interventions like this that could have meaningful change actually become a realized and accessible thing to people who need them?
um I think so. Something that I thought was really interesting from my research is this gap that I've kind of identified, and then the kind of whole project is based on. I'm not the only person who identified this gap. In fact, the healthcare system know this gap exists. They might not have the time or the resources to cater to the gap, but wherever there are gaps in different industries and different areas, a lot of the times the people in charge are aware of this gap. And so even if they themselves don't have the resources or the capabilities to address it, it would be always great to essentially address the fact that there is a gap and put out that call for whoever it is that might have the resources and the capability to address that. And I think I don't think there would be anything wrong with the healthcare system being like, these are the gaps we have. these communities are not being catered to. Does anybody have the resources, the insights, or can provide support in how we can address this gap? And conferences like the Magnify conference. I mean, I've kind of only heard of Magnify conference in all the amazing things they're doing to elevate these voices, but this is exactly the kind of space that is perfect to be having these conversations. And yeah.
No, I love the idea of the health systems crowdsourcing solutions to gaps that are in in providers. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I guess thank you again, Tahira. I appreciate there's been so much covered today that we haven't got more questions. But by all means, yes, thank you so much for your talk. And thank you everyone for joining today. Just to make sure I give you all the information about what's happening next. As before, if you want to continue this discussion, you've got the Reflections channel in Slack. You can put more questions for Tahira or any of the other speakers today on that. Or by all means, if there's been anything interesting that's kind of piqued your interest, you can spark some discussion there. We have one workshop which will be starting in I'm not sure what time. I think when this session ended, it was supposed to start within an hour and a half, but I think that might be a bit longer. Claudia, feel free to correct me.
No, I had to check too, don't worry. I think an hour and 40 minutes, so yeah.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And that will be a workshop called Brain Gain, Leveraging Neurodiversity for an Inclusive Work Culture, and that will be hosted by Pazby Zabatsky, followed by a final coffee chat. So thank you once again, Tahira. Thank you everyone who joined today. That's it for today's program of talks. We hope you enjoyed them, and we'll see you either in the workshop later today or for tomorrow, the final day of the program and for the conference, which will be on research practices. Woo, research. Yes, it's been wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.